Today we're here with a very special guest, Ronan Levy from Fieldtrip Health.com. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. Good to see you.
Yeah, so tell us about, let's say, psychedelic assisted therapy. What is that?
Yeah, so I mean, it is exactly what it sounds like. It is using psychedelic drugs, like psilocybin, like MDMA, like ketamine. Those are the ones currently, I think, in the most advanced states of research, and pairing it with therapy, different forms of therapy, typically forms of cognitive behavioral therapy, to create really impactful outcomes. What we're seeing from the research, and we're talking about like phase 3 FDA approved clinical trials using, for example, MDMA assisted therapy, we're seeing 70% of participants who had chronic severe PTSD for up to 16 years no longer meeting the criteria of having PTSD. So we're talking about like a near effective cure when you have an experience on MDMA and pair that with psychotherapy before and after. Similarly, with psilocybin, magic mushrooms is the kind of street term for psilocybin. When paired with therapy, a single psilocybin assisted therapy session can provide antidepressant relief for up to 5 years for some people. So we're seeing really incredible effects of using psychedelic drugs, these very stigmatized molecules, and pairing them with psychedelics. We're seeing some of the most profound mental health transformations possibly imaginable. And we can do that right now, even though MDMA and psilocybin are still Schedule 1 in the US. Ketamine, which is actually an FDA approved drug, approved as an anesthetic, but is being used increasingly, including at Fieldtrip Health, off label for the treatment of depression. We're seeing patients after a few sessions who will be have substantially reduced depression symptoms, going from severe to mild to non existent, for months at a time. So, really, really profound, life changing outcomes for a lot of people.
That's great. That's great. I mean, essentially what you're talking about is healing the world.
I mean, that's one way to say it. I think that's a little bit ambitious, but I do think, the potential impacts of the work we're doing are really significant because we're talking about it in the context of treating depression. We're looking at objective measures, sorry, depression, anxiety, PTSD, DSM-5 clinical diagnoses of mental health conditions. So we're seeing incredible results in the treatment of those indications. But what isn't talked about as much yet, but I think it will be soon, is that in addition to having these improvements in depression and anxiety and all the quality of life improvements that go along with that, which I'm sure many people can understand and imagine, what we're also seeing is that people who have psychedelic experiences tend to have greater openness to other people's viewpoints, greater regard for the planet, increased creativity, increased empathy. So not only are people feeling better and happier and more resilient, they're also more empathetic. They're also more compassionate. They're also more creative. And so when you start to factor in how the combination of those effects is going to have an impact on our society as psychedelic therapies become more and more mainstream, you can start to do the math being like, wow, this is actually going to be quite significantly impactful for our culture and for, truthfully, the future of humanity. But I'm not going to say we're saving the world just yet, but the trend lines definitely point in a favorable direction.
That's great. So, Field Trip Health, is this for anyone? Can anyone go to fieldtriphealth.com and check it out and have an experience? Or how does it work?
No, we're focused on bringing legitimacy and credibility, particularly through the medical lens. A lot of people, when they heard about cannabis, and our background was actually in helping to scale the medical cannabis industry in Canada and really bring a lot of legitimacy and transparency to it. We're trying to do that here as well, which means we're focused on medicine, doing medicine right, doing it properly, treating people who have real medical needs that are not being served by other treatment options. So right now, in order to come to Fieldtrip and become a client of ours, we need to see that you have a real medical need, whether it's treatment resistant depression, whether it's anxiety, whether it's any number of indications. We need to see that there is a mental health need here. Someone who just wants to come in and go for an experience, that's not on the cards. At some point in the
Yet.
future, is it? Yeah, at some point in the future, might it be? Maybe, but we're going to have to do a lot of work to convince people that this is real medicine showing real results, and it's safe and it's effective. And we're working from a great platform already, right? In terms of safety, ketamine, MDMA, psilocybin, LSD, even though a lot of what we probably were taught in high school suggested otherwise, they're actually amongst the safest molecules out there. Illicit or licit, we're talking about, the risk of addiction is virtually zero, at least with the classic tryptamines like psilocybin and LSD. Risk of overdose is virtually zero. um, the risk of negative experiences, or the so-called bad trips, is actually quite low when you're doing this work in a controlled environment with the right therapeutic support. So the risk that many people have in their head when they think about psychedelics and bad trips and losing their mind, it's mostly non-existent. It's mostly a fabrication generated for more political purposes than anything else. And so we have a great platform to work from in terms of showing the safety and efficacy, but it does take a long time to change people's minds. So we're focused on creating good data, real evidence, and we think with that, you're going to win over the medical community, and as you win over the medical community, then the rest of society will follow in thinking about these treatments as being real viable mental health options in the future.
That's great. Thank you so much. We'll be right back. What does a setting look like at Fieldtrip Health? Maybe we can talk about that.
Sure. And that's one of the things that's really unique about psychedelic assisted therapy is like we're talking about drugs, and all the drugs we're talking about have gone through FDA or are going through FDA approval. So these are going to be approved medicines if they're not already. But what makes psychedelic assisted therapy so unique is the fact that it's using a psychedelic with a therapy, right? And what we know from the 50 or 60 years of experience with these molecules, truthfully, eons of experience in some cultural settings, is that the set and setting, meaning the mindset you bring into the experience and the actual location where you have the psychedelic experience, has a significant impact on the therapeutic outcomes, right? So it's not, what we know is that this is not something that you want to do in kind of like a hospital setting with white walls and fluorescent lights and a whole bunch of frenetic, emergency room energy around you. There's a place and time for that. Don't get me wrong. That kind of care is wonderful and is needed. But when it comes to psychedelic therapies and the treatment of mental health conditions, where you do it and the work you put into it actually has a significant impact. So at our Fieldtrip Health centers, what we realize is that you need new spaces to actually do this, that most doctors' offices are not equipped, both in terms of the equipment as well as the staffing, to actually deliver psychedelic therapies, given that these experiences can be a couple hours to many hours at a time. And so at Fieldtrip Health, if you go to our website fieldtriphealth.com, as you've kindly mentioned a couple of times, you can see that we've designed clinics that are built to be inviting, comfortable, safe, that put people at ease, because the more at ease you are with the experience, the more comfortable you are, the more familiar you are with your therapeutic team and your doctors, the better your experience is going to be and the better the therapeutic outcomes. And so set and setting actually matter quite a bit in psychedelic therapies. And that's why we're so focused on that part of our work and developing not only the space, but also a process that people can get comfortable with.
That's great. Now, can psychedelics be used to treat substance abuse?
A lot of the research actually into psychedelics in the 50s and 60s was in their application to treating tobacco addiction or alcohol addiction. In fact, this is a little known fact. Alcoholics Anonymous was actually inspired by an LSD trip. The founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, whose name is eluding me right now, had the idea for AA during an LSD trip. So yes, there is a lot of evidence suggesting that psychedelics can be used in the treatment of a lot of addiction disorders, including opiate disorders. There's at least anecdotal evidence and some basic academic evidence suggesting ibogaine, which is a psychedelic root in Africa, derived from Africa, may be very beneficial in the treatment of opioid addiction. So we're seeing a lot of different potential applications of addiction. Still early days. The evidence isn't fully baked yet, but there's a lot of promise and a lot of reason to believe that this could be an interesting therapeutic area for psychedelics.
Sure. Could you tell us a little bit more about ketamine therapy and what is it? I mean, it's not a party drug. It's not something. It doesn't go up the nose. It's administered a different way, I believe.
That is correct. So ketamine is an FDA approved anesthetic. It's been approved since the 1960s in most countries worldwide. In fact, ketamine was identified by the World Health Organization as an essential medicine in most countries because what makes ketamine so great as an anesthetic is it doesn't really depress your CNS, right? When you're talking about most anesthetics and opioids, the risk of overdose isn't what many people, at least I imagine, as being like this great flame out where someone's like vomiting all over themselves and having a massive seizure. Usually, what people experience when they overdose is they fall asleep, and because they've depressed their CNS, their central nervous system, so much, they actually forget to breathe and essentially suffocate. With ketamine, that's not a risk. And so it's a really powerful anesthetic. It did get a reputation as a party drug, and people going into quote unquote K-holes where they kind of just blackout unconscious. And that is a risk, although the long-term impacts of experiencing a K-hole are very minimal. So it's low risk in terms of long-term health, but it's not necessarily a pleasant experience. Um, and so at our clinics, what we do is we administer ketamine. In most locations, it's done by an intramuscular injection, and it's a sub-anesthetic dose. It's actually a very small dose, but it's enough to enable people to have a pretty psychedelic-like experience, right? If you can imagine what it's like, whether you've experienced psilocybin or not, or magic mushrooms, you have a sense of, at least based on the media examples of what it's like. And with ketamine, people have a similar type experience. They often report just like an out-of-body experience, where there's a sense of quiet or calm or isolation, and they're able to see the world from a perspective that they hadn't had before. We get so caught up in our heads sometimes that having that separation from ourselves for a little while gives a lot of perspective. And so, after we do the preparatory therapy work and making sure the person's comfortable and this is an appropriate treatment, people come in for their ketamine session. Usually the ketamine experience lasts an hour to an hour and a half. And after that, you have a time to talk with your therapist, because often people are able to revisit past memories, past traumas, past events, or just see the world in a new way. And it's great to be able to share that and express that with your therapist. And so that's what a typical experience looks like at Fieldtrip.
Anyway, we're talking about psychedelic assisted therapy, and I wanted to ask you about psilocybin assisted therapy. How is that different than MDMA assisted therapy or ketamine?
Functionally, the experience of psychedelic assisted therapies, whether it's ketamine or psilocybin or MDMA, the experience on a high level is the same. You're pairing therapy with a psychedelic experience, and using the therapeutic protocols that surround it both before and after to help people take the awareness and insights they've had during the psychedelic experience and turn it into action and behavior change and mindset change and outlook change. So on that level, it's no different. What you see that's different with psilocybin versus, say, ketamine or MDMA is that the experience in terms of its subjective experience is going to be a little bit different. Psilocybin tends to be more colorful, more vibrant. People are often have more visceral kind of experiences in terms of the vividness of a memory or an experience, and in some cases do report hallucinations, but like in a positive way, generally speaking. Usually it's quite positive when done in the right environment. And it tends to last about 4 to 6 hours that you're substantially feeling the effects of psilocybin. And that's it. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same. It's paired with therapy. The results we're seeing from a scientific and medical perspective are quite profound. We're seeing people, like I said before, reporting antidepressant effects for up to 5 years. After a single psilocybin assisted therapy session. So it's really quite powerful. And again, it's really important for people to understand it's incredibly safe too. Again, there's no risk of overdose with psilocybin. There is, I don't think, any known LD50, which is kind of the amount you'd need to take to have an overdose experience. Yes, you can take too much. Yes, you can get sick. Yes, you will pass out. But in terms of like a significant risk of overdose, there's virtually zero. There's virtually zero risk of addiction with psilocybin. In fact, as we've talked about, it is anti-addictive and can be used to help people get off other addictions, at least so the evidence suggests. And then beyond that, it really is about the experience plus the therapy leading to really meaningful outcomes.
That sounds great. So, who should and shouldn't take psychedelics? Who is it for?
Well, I mean, that's a pretty
And who is it
loaded
not for?
question.
I mean,
Yeah.
is it for everyone?
Well, the truth is, It really depends. Are we talking in terms of the medical application? At least with ketamine and what we're doing right now within our field trip health centers, ketamine assisted therapy is generally appropriate for most people suffering with mental health challenges. It is generally safe. Like I said, generally non-addictive. Risk of a bad experience is quite low, and the benefits potentially quite significant. It is not generally indicated for people who have uncontrolled high blood pressure because ketamine can increase your blood pressure. It's generally not indicated for people who have experienced schizophrenic breaks or severe bipolar. People whose grip on so-called reality tends to be tenuous. It's generally not a good idea to offer them a drug that would probably further expand that, although there's some evidence to suggest it may be beneficial. By and large, the guidance right now is that it's not for people with severe mental illness. This is for people who are dealing with depression, anxiety, PTSD, but with a generally strong grip on objective reality right now. But besides that, obviously women who are nursing or pregnant probably not well suited for this. But outside of that, anyone suffering from mental health condition could potentially benefit from ketamine assisted therapy. In terms of psilocybin and other molecules, we're waiting for the evidence to say who it is and who it isn't for. But based on at least the anecdotal information and the research on MDMA and psilocybin from the perspective of drugs of abuse, them being safe, generally speaking, it seems like it's possible and very likely that these will be indicated for a number of indications in a number of populations. So I think there will be a lot of people for whom it may be appropriate, but it's a little too early to say.
Great. What about how soon do you think it will be before these kinds of therapies are more public and more on the market for the public, for everyone, perhaps?
So ketamine assisted therapy is available now. For, like I said, anyone who's suffering with a mental health indication, we're available. We have 7 locations operating right now. We'll be at 20 locations, and there's numerous other ketamine clinics popping up around North America. In terms of psilocybin, the guidance from Compass Pathways, which is the company in the most advanced clinical trials, they're in phase 2B right now. They expect to have approval to start marketing psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression sometime around 2025, so about 4 years from now. But we also see state-based actions. So anyone who is following what happened in the state of Oregon in the last election, they actually created an access program called the Psilocybin Services Act, whereby people, as long as they don't have a specific contraindication, so schizophrenia, for example, above the age of, I think, 21, will be able to access psilocybin sessions with a trained facilitator at a licensed location. And so as early 2023, people in the state of Oregon, or I guess visitors to the state of Oregon, will be able to access psilocybin therapy through that manner, which is not a purely medical manner, but I think it is a very thoughtful program. MDMA, we're expecting to see approval for MDMA assisted therapy sometime around 2023. So it's not very far away. I mean, it is too far away for many people. There's no doubt about it. But if you think about the landscape in which we've kind of evolved from, the fact that we're talking about legal access to psychedelic drugs sometime in the next couple of years is still a pretty watershed moment in my mind. And so I think it's happening quite quickly, all things considered.
It's great to be able to document it right here
Absolutely.
as it's happening.
Yeah, exactly. It's all real time.
Yeah. So before these things are made legal, we should say that people should not experiment on their own. Is that correct, or what do you have to say about that? What do you think?
I don't want to be naive in saying people won't do this and don't do this. Like I somehow know what's better for you. I think the most important thing is for people to be informed and understand. Like most of the drugs we're talking about are still Schedule 1, so it is illegal to buy and possess them. So you take legal risk, and there are some medical risks associated with them, right? We've talked about some of the places where they're contraindicated. So it's not like they're harmless. They are relatively low harm, but there are risks associated with them. So instead of me standing up here and saying you shouldn't do them, the right answer is you should be really informed and understand the risks you take on personally by choosing to work with psychedelics in the current legal and regulatory landscape, and make, a thoughtful, informed decision for yourself.
Psychedelic assisted therapy, which is going to be something that we're going to see, I think, a lot more of in the future, perhaps.
Undoubtedly, when you look at the safety and the efficacy of psychedelic assisted therapies, and the number of people who are suffering with mental health challenges and the lack of really effective treatment options that exist right now, it's just hard to come to a conclusion that we're not going to see psychedelic assisted therapies being robustly available, accessible, and a lot of people relying on them. I certainly, and I know some people think I'm outlandish, but I certainly see a future, and I hope for a future where people think about going to see their psychedelic practitioner or clinician, once every 6 months, kind of like we go to see your dental hygienist, kind of like your mental hygiene appointment. I think it'll do wonders for the world. I think we'd have happier people. I think we'd have more resilient people. I think we'd have more emotionally aware people. I think we'd have more compassionate people. All of these wonderful attributes, and you don't need to be clear. It's like we don't need psychedelic drugs for that to be a possibility. I think it's very much a possibility we get there with conventional approaches to therapy and education. It's just that the psychedelic assisted therapies seem to get people there a lot faster and help them go a lot further than in conventional approaches. So I do foresee a very robust future for psychedelics in our society, but particularly in the treatment of mental health.
Great. So, people with severe mental illness should not consider doing this therapy. Is that correct, or?
Any medical decision, any decision you make about your own mind and your own body is one where you have to weigh the benefits against the risks, right? So if you're a person who is in the high risk category because you have a severe mental illness, that's got to be weighed. You've got to make that decision for yourself. But I would probably caution against it because it could make your symptoms or your condition much potentially worse. So I would advise against it. But again, it's your call. If you're someone whose mental health is in check and you're well balanced and you're emotionally resilient and you've done work and understand your triggers and all that kind of stuff, if you choose to experiment with psychedelics, again, there are risks involved, but it's probably less risky for you to engage with psychedelics at that point. And keep in mind, there are jurisdictions. We do talk about psychedelics being illegal, but that's not universally true. For instance, in Jamaica, psychedelics are not illegal. So access to psilocybin mushrooms is not regulated. It's not illegal. So people can go and do this stuff if they want to. Most important thing, again, is just be educated, be informed, understanding what you're getting into, understand the benefits, understand the risk, and make a thoughtful decision before you do anything.
Sure. With these medicines, it will probably greatly reduce the dependency on pharmaceutical medications.
Certainly some, yeah. We're seeing incredible results where people no longer need to, access antidepressants or SSRIs or SNRIs. So there are going to be a lot of people who probably can go off their conventional medications, which I think is fantastic. If you can go through a single experience and achieve, remission or benefit instead of having to take a daily pill, which inevitably has side effects, what a wonderful gift in my mind.
Yeah. What would it mean for the pharmaceutical industry, or would they hop on board? What would happen, do you think?
I think the pharmaceutical industry would hop on board. I mean, we already see it happening. Compass Pathways, which is the company leading the clinical trials with psilocybin, Otsuka Pharmaceuticals, a large Japanese pharmaceutical manufacturer, invested in their last financing. And certainly we've had interest from different pharmaceutical companies, at least having conversations in Fieldtrip to understand what we're doing. So I don't think pharma is going to try and seek and destroy what's happening here. I think they'll choose to, participate and enjoy. We'll see. The evidence is going to have to speak for itself, though, right? Pharma will probably stay on the sidelines until these clinical trials get completed and the evidence speaks for itself, and then I think you'll see very active participation.
That's great. That's great. So, in closing, where can we check you out? Where can we find out more about Ronan Levy and Fieldtrip Health? Tell us
Yeah,
about it.
so sure. So if you want to check out more about Fieldtrip Health, if you're interested in our clinics and the services we're providing, fieldtriphealth.com is the website. If you're interested from an investor perspective, because we are publicly traded on the NASDAQ now, it's meetfieldtrip.com is our investor relations site. And if you want to follow me, I guess on socials, Fieldtrip at Fieldtrip Health is our handle on Twitter and Instagram and all that kind of stuff. And if you want to follow me, it's at Ronan D as in David Levy. So Ronan D Levy are my social handles. So you can check out all the nonsense I like to spew online there.
Great. Thank you so much for being on the show.